In the wake of Georgia-Florida weekend, I decided to head down to Columbus, Georgia to shadow Mike Haskey for a day. Who better to learn the ways of a typical newsroom than the one person who has almost caught up to our very own Marquis Johnson in weekend and petite workshop attendance. I called Mr. Haskey ahead of time to find out what our schedule would consist of, but not even an hour after I had talked to him, I got a call back telling me the schedule had changed. I quickly discovered how assignments can change on short notice in the news industry.
I normally work Tuesday through Saturday, usually days, sometimes nights, sometimes kind of a hybrid. The consistencies would be I know that there are assignments every day that I'm going to shoot. I don't necessarily know what they're going to be every day. The schedule is fairly predictable, though like today when we have short staffing, it can get a little more unpredictable. Probably the big wild card for us is going to be breaking news, because that can throw everything into turmoil pretty quickly. And with a small staff, we pretty carefully budget resources and time, and a lot of times all the photographers are pretty busy, but then if there's an accident or a fire or a homicide or something like that, all that planning that we do goes out the window, and we just kind of have to pick up the pieces afterwards. There's rarely a day that I don't do something that's work related. I mean, I have a company cell phone that I carry with me all the time. I'll take my phone with me when I go to the pottery studio, and so I might be sitting at the pottery wheel throwing a pot after work, have my hands just covered in mud, and the phone rings, and I look, and it's a call from one of our photographers or a reporter or an editor, and they've got some kind of issue or question that they need to deal with.
As soon as I walked into the newsroom at the Columbus Ledger-Enquirer, I noticed the scarcity of people. Mr. Haskey told me about the changes the paper has gone through since he began working there about 25 years ago.
In the newsroom as a whole, like a lot of other papers, we've seen a significant reduction in the size of our staff within the photo department, as well as within other parts of the newsroom and just the newspaper in general. There have been a lot of technology changes, and the workflow has changed quite a bit, and the type of work and the quantity of work has changed.
We had 4 assignments on tap for the day. It began with a trip to the mall to get a quick portrait of a JCPenney men's department employee. In this shot, Mr. Haskey found himself wading through racks and racks of men's blazers, all while trying to get his subject to maintain a natural pose and expression. After noticing the subject in the JCPenney shoot was a little tense being in front of a camera, I asked Mr. Haskey what to do in situations when the subject is extremely uncomfortable being photographed.
So if we encounter someone who is uncomfortable with having their picture taken, that's fine. We'll talk to you. I mean, we'll do kind of a traditional written print story. We can run that online, and for us, it's the most important thing is to get the information and get the story. And even though I'm a photographer, I would rather do that than not get the story because we bring a camera into the equation.
As soon as we left JCPenney's, we headed to an animal shelter across town for a story about the shelter taking in 35 dogs from an elderly couple who couldn't handle the burden anymore. However, before we arrived, most of the puppies were already adopted, so the story had changed a little from what Mike Haskey had expected on the trip over. During this assignment, Mr. Haskey shot video as well as stills, and explained to me the need to be willing to learn various skills instead of having a specialty in the news industry.
You know, with the smaller staffs these days and the demands of online publishing, it's really important to have multiple abilities, to kind of be multi-talented, to kind of be, I guess, in the theater world, you would be called a triple threat. You know, that's someone who can sing, dance, and act. Here, these days, in the photo department, I mean, you really need to be a good still photographer. You need to be a good videographer or be moving towards being a good videographer. But you also need to be a solid writer and a good reporter, because on any given day, you can be called on to do one of those things, 2 of those things, 3 of those things, or you could be asked to do all 3 of those things on one assignment.
Following the shelter assignment, we went to a dress rehearsal at Columbus State University to shoot a few staged photos that would follow along with the play the students were putting on. The students acted out a few scenes to themselves, pausing only when their professor told them to stop for Mr. Haskey to get a few shots. As the sun started to set, we headed over to the softball fields to get a few shots before Mr. Haskey headed home for the day. However, when we got there, the games were delayed even more than expected. After standing around a little while, the game finally started, and Mr. Haskey got a few shots he was satisfied with, and we left before the third inning. Then we went back to the paper to get a little editing done before he closed up shop for the day and headed home. Although it turned into a longer than expected day, that opened up more time to learn about the life of a newspaper chief photographer. Before I left Columbus, Mr. Haskey gave me some tips on how to continue learning to be a better storyteller.
One thing I would do is I like to look at other industries and other fields to kind of bring in things that I think might be helpful to me. So since I'm trying to get better at doing video, I look at a lot of television and a lot of cinema and movies. If you want to learn a great way to shoot pictures horizontally, look at really good cinema because they can't shoot vertically. You can look at painting and sculpture and other types of art to learn some stuff about design and color. Do a lot of reading. Read really good narratives. You can learn a lot about storytelling by reading good writers. Read books on sentence structure and grammar and how to be a better writer, because a lot of that stuff will transfer right over to video when you start to do that. You will learn more about narrative, and that's really important.